Welcome back to AFTV, everyone. It is time to look behind the numbers. Turkish and I are back to discuss. We really enjoyed the show the 2-3 times we did it last season. Time to look back at the opening 8 games. I mean, we waited to the halfway point before we did the show a year ago. We did. But a lot of debate has been sparked around this question. Are Arsenal ready for the title? And that leans into, are we better than last season? That is ultimately where it comes down to. And we've debated this a lot on Forever Arsenal and in the coming games as we go game by game. Having sat on the City result for a week, before we go deep into the numbers, are we ready for the title?
Are we ready for the title?
I know. It's a heavy question.
It's a heavy question because of Pep.
Yeah.
And Man City and what they've done over the last 6 years. I think we should be ready. Mm-hmm. Whether we are or not, we find out come May.
I think we're going to get some insight now as we go through the numbers. I know a lot of us have been talking about it. I wanted to draw on a lot of the stuff that you've been talking about Forever Arsenal. Hold that thought for a sec. Let's just start by understanding, well, how do you go from being better last season to this season? Well, first thing you can do is have a good summer in the transfer window. So we're going to have a little look at Arsenal's signings and remind ourselves of what we did. Kai Havertz was the first to come in, central midfielder / striker. Declan Rice, a defensive midfielder / central midfielder coming in as well. Jurrien Timber, who can play anywhere across the back four, and David Raya, the goalkeeper. Just a quick reflection on that window. Obviously the Timber injury slightly skews it, but did that feel like a window, regardless of injuries, that was going to be a significant upgrade on last season's squad? Being
honest, no.
Fair enough.
Listen, Declan Rice, what a player.
Yeah.
Hits the ground running, and he's proving why we spent the money we did on him. Mm-hmm. Jurrien Timber, he looked like a great player. He looks like he's going to, come back from his injury and hopefully return the same player because he's got a big part to play at this side, in this squad. Raya was a surprise. I didn't mind it, especially for the fee. The Havertz one for me brought the transfer window rating down because I didn't think it was an adequate upgrade on Xhaka, and so far it's been proven to be correct in my opinion. So overall, I looked at the transfer window, and early on, I looked at Man City's looking visibly weaker with Gundogan and Mahrez going, and I thought, well, we are slightly stronger in my opinion. And they're slightly weaker, in my opinion. Then Man City go on to buy Doku, Nunes, and whoever else in the last few weeks, which kind of lifts their window up. So on the face of it, the window we had, Declan Rice, Timber, great additions, Raya, shrewd, Havertz, still waiting to justify that. You touched on that part, which is looking at Man City and other rivals to understand if we're ready to win the title. We've got to know what others have done to win it as well. Let's have a little look at this second graphic with the Premier League club spend from this summer. Arsenal bringing in 4 players, spending £203 million. Man United brought in 7 at £178 million, a £65 million striker in there. Mason Mount coming in for £65 million as well. Man City bought 4 players but actually outspent us. £208 million they spent on Doku, Nunes, Gvardiol and Kovacic. Chelsea brought in a whopping 11 players at £399 million spent, and Liverpool 4 players with £148 million. When you look at all that, Chelsea had the furthest to go but spent £400 million. Liverpool, they're the only team and group of players that have come close to City with Klopp, spent £150 million to revamp their whole midfield. Man City won the treble and outspent everyone bar Chelsea, who has spent off the scale. So this question that keeps coming up in Big Six, Arsenal must, feels a bit harsh, doesn't it? No, and my response to that is every season City must. That is the team that must. When you look at what they've built, the infrastructure, the structure off the pitch in terms of boardroom level all the way down to manager, the structure on the pitch in terms of the playing style and what they've done in terms of 6 league titles in 7 seasons, I believe, or 5 in 7, whatever it is. It's been a great period for them. Yeah, I mean, they always must, especially with a striker that's just come in, that's broken the Premier League record at 22 years of age. They always must. But I do understand the pressure on Arsenal now because our trajectory has been slowly but surely upward in the last 3-4 years. 8th, 5th, 2nd. Then we go and spend over 100 million, which for Arsenal, it was inconceivable in years gone past for us to spend that amount of money on one player.
It felt good, didn't it? 105 on Rice.
It felt like we're turning a corner. It feels like we have turned a corner, but is it a must that Arsenal win the title? As an Arsenal fan, I say, we must always challenge. But taking a step back, I've also got to be real, and that's what I tend to be. And Man City are still the strongest team in this league.
I understand that. I mean, I still have faith that Arsenal have caught up to that level. But like we said, when you look at this, they've bought 4 players, we bought 4, they slightly outspent us, they've added another defender, and I think they've added another dynamic in Doku, and when we talk about having a plan B and different options, they probably address that more than we address that in this window. But let's show you our first 8 results this season and compare it to last year's first 8 results. Of course, you've got the defeat against Man United, but otherwise 21 points from 24. Arsenal with 20 points from 24. This season, we scored 20 goals and conceded 8 last season, scored 16 and conceded 6 in the opening 8 of this season. This might sound a silly question, but let's actually think about it. What's a better start of these two? Because I know on the pitch fluidity, and we're going to talk about Arsenal's playing style. Yeah. But as a set of results, to go unbeaten and have a win against City and a win at Goodison already in your first 8, I'd argue leans towards a better start, despite actually being a point behind last season and quite a few goals behind as well. But I'm curious how you feel about our start in these opening 8 compared to last season.
An argument can be made either way.
Yeah, it could.
100%.
Strongly.
I mean, what one could say, listen, 21 points is better than 20, even though we lost the game. We've dropped 4 points in our first 8. We've dropped 3 in the first 8 last
2 home
season.
games as well this season to drop points.
Then the argument could be that we've changed up tactically to be a bit more rigid and structural defensively. And then when you look at the results, I mean, what's that? 4 clean sheets in our first 8 games this season.
Yeah.
And 3 clean sheets in our first 8. So not much between them, but we got 1 more clean sheet. Then there's the argument that have we set up a bit more rigid defensively at the cost of our attack? Well, potentially yes, because we scored 20 in our first 8 last season. We scored 16 in our first 8 this season, but it's not like for like. The teams are not like for like. Like I look at our away games at the first 8: Palace away, Brentford away, Man United away. 3 generally difficult away games. And when you look at our away games this season, listen, we faced Palace away again, Everton away, which is one we dropped all 3 points last season. They're probably the most difficult. So an argument can be made either way. I think it's hard to really look at that and say one way or another whether we've improved or not.
Especially because it's 4 and 4 in terms of home and away games last season, and we've had 5 home games this season to 3. So that also skews slightly. But what's weird is that 2 of the drop points of they're both at home. So it's a weird one. You're right to mention the different opponents. So let's place these results up against last season's results as well, and just compare how we did in both games. Last season, a 5-0 win at home to Forest, but a 2-1 win this season. Palace 1-0 to the 2-0 last year. Fulham, those first 3 games we did better last year than this year. But Man United, Everton, City, crucially, all better. And when you look at the points this season, 20 out of those games, 18 last season, but we've scored less, we've conceded less too. It's really difficult to try and, you want more points, 2 points clearly better than 18, so we're up on that. But again, your reaction to this?
I think this is probably a better metric in terms of last season and this season comparisons, because when it's the first 8 games, like we just mentioned it, you can use those stats in any which way to make an argument for and against. This one is more, listen, like for like. What did we do against Everton last season? We lost. We need to turn that around this season because we fell some way short at the end. I say some way, 5 points, it could have been 10. Same again with Man City. Lost to them at the Emirates. We've turned that around. Yes, we've dropped points to Tottenham and Fulham at home, which last season we didn't do. But in general, when I look at that, it looks like a +2 on last season's fixtures, if I'm not mistaken.
No, you're absolutely right. It's just interesting that we scored less goals when you look at, some tricky games there. Man United at home. I mean, obviously the Tottenham, we scored 3 against Tottenham, we scored 3 against Man United, 5 against Palace, and against Forest. And we're waiting for that big moment where Arsenal really batter a team. Even the Bournemouth game, it didn't always feel like we battered them because of 2 penalties and a little bit of fortune in the goals. So let's move on to the next graphic. I want to show you our underlying Premier League stats, and now us trying to understand this team, because people who say that we're not the most fluid and the most exciting going forward, I think have a point, and some of these FBref rankings compared to other teams in the league kind of show it. We rank 8th for XG. Weirdly, Everton rank quite high, which is a weird one. In terms of expected goals against, we rank 2nd, so clearly defensively we're doing something right.
Okay, good.
Again, shots, we rank 9th, but shots against, we rank 2nd. So again, there's something about our style that is helping us defensively. But passes, shot creating actions, again, not right up there with the very best, not bad. But then again, shot creating actions against 2nd. There is definitely something
100%,
that defensively is being tied up now. So we're behind City to all these defensive numbers. But we are not anywhere kind of near the best in the league in terms of peppering goals, being super exciting going forward, which is such a contrast to last season, where last season we were just electric, it felt.
Yeah. That's the big change. That you mentioned, fans have been, concerned about maybe our lack of fluidity. I've been one of the most vocal about that, and I think these stats back it up. But what also these stats do is prove why we're less maybe fluid in the transition and less lethal in attack, because we're focusing on the defensive side of things. Now, it's a bold move.
Yeah.
I mentioned it before, it's a bold move by Arteta, because when I look at the first 8 games of last season, and I look at the first 8 games of this season and that graph that I just gone, the first thing that came to mind is, with a young team, I link a young team with excitement and fluidity and shackles being off, more than I link a young team to being rigid and controlling and suffocating opponents. That's why I think it's such a bold move to go with this approach with such a young team.
Yeah.
But lo and behold, in our last game against City, it's our first win in the league against them for years.
Yeah.
And I say years lightly.
Yeah.
It could be years, really, and multiple A's. So it's a bold move, but so far, it seems to be working.
So, you know what I find so interesting about this, and I really wanted to show this because it highlights what we believe we're seeing with our eyes, and I stand by it, and that proves it. But if I show you this next graphic where I compare these underlying numbers, so these these numbers, but I give you the actual numbers per game compared to last season, there are dips that support. And listen, per game, it's always going to narrow it down slightly.
Yeah.
But then you go, there's not that much in it though. Okay, 2.2 goals per game last season to 2 this season. So our XG drops as well. So cool, that supports what we're seeing, what we're thinking. Expected goals against, quite a decent drop to 0.8 from 1.1 expected goals against. Shots is down by almost a shot and a half per game. Shots against though, again, not that much better. I think it's more where we're inviting shots from. Passes, we seem to keep the ball a lot more, and that leans into the control you're talking about, having more of the ball, maintaining possession. Not as high on shot creating actions last year, but exactly the same on shot creating actions against. So it's a weird one, because these are the kind of numbers I imagine Arteta might be seeing and going, what's everyone complaining about? Yeah. But again, you've got to apply the eye test to it, and some of those key ones still support what we're saying, like a significant rise in passes as well.
100%, and listen, we're comparing 8 games here to the 38 games last season, I assume, by that side.
Yeah. So, it's the 8 versus the 38.
And the first 8 here, considering the tweaks made tactically and the arrivals that have come in, one being integral to the first team in Declan Rice and another being Havertz, who I think the idea was for him to be integral, but he's been, stop-start so far. I think it's hard to look at the stats from the first 8 and get a fair reflection of what it is. I think maybe, maybe come December/January when we do behind the numbers again, I think that will be a better platform to be able to assess this season and last season a bit more. Because, it's tight in, shots against and shot creating actions against, literally tied in both, 8.9, 14.9. So I'd expect them to go down the more familiar we get with our new tactical approach, which is to protect us more defensively.
I completely agree. It's far too small a pool already. It's just, I wanted to see whether there was anything that suggested a big difference. The passes doesn't surprise me too much. I think we look at a team that want to keep the ball more and want to be more controlled and measured. We're not always getting it to the wingers and taking as many risks. The drop in some of the attacking stats doesn't surprise me. Shots, XG and goals all being down. But I think you're right. When we hit 19 games, I expect that to move slightly further away, and that's not actually a good thing. But it is if the other defensive stats are really moving away, and you get that
100%. 100%. If the defensive stats remain the same come 20 games in, and the attacking stats go down, then literally the tactical tweaks and maybe arrivals have not really had the impact that we would have hoped, or he would have hoped.
Completely agreed. Now let's show you some actual sort of graphics and screenshots I got from the analysts. I'll show you this graphic, for example. It's a team sequence styles graphic. I find it really interesting. It basically sort of gives you an idea of a team's tempo and style on the ball. So direct speed on the left, measured in M-S. You'll know what that means. I'm being an idiot anyway. And then you've got passes per sequence. Anyway, it measures pace of attacks. From the higher you are, fast and direct. You see West Ham, very fast and direct team. That doesn't surprise us. But Burnley, a very slow team to get from one end of the pitch to the other. Passes per sequence, though. Arsenal, the nearest to City, who are right in that bottom right-hand corner in terms of being very slow and intricate. You know, they're slow on the ball, lots of passes. Arsenal nearer that. They're not as slow as a Burnley or City, but they are in the bottom 3 slowest, or should I say top 3 slowest teams in the league. I don't really know what I'm going to ask you here. I just kind of want to know what you think of this graphic.
Yeah, it's interesting. It adds further to me saying this is bold of Arteta. Because look, you can see City are by far the most intricate team. I'll use the word intricate rather than slow, because slow sounds derogatory, but by far the most intricate team. We are
calculated.
Second closest, calculated. Yeah, we are second closest in terms of being a calculated team. But funnily enough, we see Chelsea there as well, which is quite bold of what Pochettino is trying to do over there. And funnily enough, we play each other come this weekend, and there is some nerves there. But I look at this and think, with this young team, is this the right approach?
I know what you mean. I
want a bit more freedom, ideally, or the chance to be a bit more free in the game if necessary.
Do you remember the segment I did on Tactical Insight after the Lens game about the lack of counter-attack?
Yeah.
And I kind of wish I'd pulled this up in that, but it's like, it's fine to have a style of play, but that doesn't mean you only play one way. And our lack of ability to get... Listen, people can say what they want about Eddie Nketiah, but he's got pace. So does Jesus, so does Saka, so does Martinelli. Trossard's not slow. Reece Nelson. Well, I don't think we do enough to kill that space when it opens up and give them the opportunity to exploit it, because our style of play involves, you know, it's so focused on build-up to the point where even David Raya will move to centre-back. And that's where I feel like, while, listen, if you're closer to City, that suggests you're doing something right. But I would like us to be a killer when the game opens up more. And I don't think we have that. It doesn't surprise me that Liverpool are actually a bit further away from all that. And I'm actually happy to go, listen, we've got 3 really dynamic, fantastic strikers. In fact, they've got 5 for 3 positions. Let's bring them in the game. And Arsenal, I think, need to add that dynamic a little bit more.
I look at the Centurions and I think they had the perfect balance. I think if you put the Centurions on this graph, I think they'd still be quite, you know, near the top of the slow and intricate segment. But they still had that fluidity and electricness in them with Sterling, Sane, and, you know, was it De Bruyne, David Silva just threading the ball, and then Aguero. They still had that in them. So as much as they was intricate them times and they'd passed the ball a hell of a lot, they had games and they had moments in games where at the flick of a switch, 2-3 goals, and they ripped you apart.
You know, I'm shaking my head like this is because it's like they were a team who they lull you into all right, we're
false
deep
sense of
block,
security.
we're okay, all right, just shuffle, and then suddenly through ball, Sterling's made a dart in behind, Sane's made a dart, and you're like, just like that. Like there was no threat, and then there was a threat.
They got the balance perfect.
And I think we have wingers to play like that. I'm not saying they're as good. I think they can get to that. But
that's part of the frustration. Now listen, I'm just a fan. I'm not a professional, so Arteta's the man. He's taken us this far, and I'm intrigued to see how it goes. But I look at Saka, Martinelli, and the next step for them, in my head or my opinion, was get 20 goals in the league next season. More so for Martinelli, because I see him as being the more lethal in front of goal. But one of you two, at the very least, if not both, get 20 goals in the league. One was on 15, one was on 14 last year, if I'm not mistaken. So that ask is not too far off what a normal trajectory should be at that age.
Agreed.
But then the tactical tweaks we've made seems to have nullified a bit of our attack. So now I don't think they will be hitting those numbers. So that is part of the frustration, because I like Martinelli and Saka so much, and I just want them to rip apart teams and you know, be those two players that, listen, they are our star boys, but I also want them to be free flowing and scoring and smiling and celebrating and, you know, just riding that wave as a young team should. But Arteta's bold in what he's doing. I'm going to keep using the word bold because it is bold. I haven't seen many managers go with a controlling style and such a young team before. I'll be open for suggestions in the comments.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you touch on our star boys and Saka very much. One of them, I want to show you this next graphic, which shows us Arsenal's attacking thirds from this season. And look how much on the right-hand side, 43% of our attacks still heavily going down Bukayo Saka's side. So, you know, and not to reopen that can of worms and the debate about whether he's being overplayed, but it's why I keep telling people, have context. You know, almost double the footballs being played on his side than in the middle, where a Rice or an Odegaard or whatever. So when people say, well, they're not getting rested, it's like, yeah, but understand the context. You know, Saka's not only playing an extortion amount of minutes, so much football is channeled down his side. And actually, I'm going to show you the next graphic as well, if we can. It's the zones of control that also comes from the analyst. And it basically shows you that we have control of basically, 5-6 of the right-hand side. So let me give you some context to this graphic. Blue is where Arsenal control the area of the pitch against opposition. Grey is where it's neutral. Red is where we don't have it. Now, it's completely normal to not have control of the penalty area because defenders win headers and they have touches or whatever. You're never going to see that even with Man City. But what's interesting is normally you'd see the opposition have the whole penalty area in red. But actually it's grey on the Saka side of the penalty area. Why? Because he still dominates so much of that area. We ask a lot of Bukayo Saka. And I think that is still important to highlight when we look at the numbers and the data, even 8 games into the season.
100%, that is interesting. Do you want me to tell you what I first thought of this graph?
Whatever you want, go for it.
Kai Havertz's area is grey as well. Whereas Odegaard's controlling his area.
You're right. That sort of left half channel space.
Yeah.
That's a great spot. I didn't even think of that.
That's the first thing I saw. I thought, oh, there's our 8. Where's Xhaka? But yeah, we move. No, but Saka, listen, we know what Saka's about. He always picks up the ball going into that.
What a spot.
That side of the ball. That's the first thing I thought, oh, fuck, you know.
Yeah.
But you're right, 100. Obviously, Martinelli not being, available regularly for us this season, that's probably skewed those numbers a bit because he is similar to Saka. He's direct, he wants to get in the box. But he's dissimilar to Saka. He doesn't really have the support that Saka has in Ben White behind him. Yeah, agreed. Now the final thing, let's get this final stat on board. It's Liverpool's underlying stats per game from the 18-19 season when they finished second to City to the 19-20 when they won it. And we talk about a controlled approach, a different approach, but you've been absolutely preaching that Liverpool had a momentum and then they maintained that momentum. They almost blew them away by winning it in that first half of the season and then keeping it going. I wanted to see if there was anything that suggested a drop-off from the season before in terms of maybe being more defensive, maybe being more secure. And we know this Liverpool on the eye might not have been quite as electric, but the underlying stats tell you that this is a case of building on that momentum rather than actually alternating a style to find another way to beat City. So does that, I mean, we go through a few, goals per game, hardly a drop. XG, hardly a drop. Expected goals against actually went up. They were conceding more in terms of expected goals. Shots, they were conceding more. Shots against, they were conceding more. They had more of the ball and shots against. They actually conceded 10 more goals in that second season when they won the league to the season before. I think it's 22 and 32 or 33. Yeah. So that's not supporting an argument for control. It is for momentum, though. It is. I mean, it's obvious that they used that momentum and they looked at their 18-19 season and said, listen, we was close, we go again. Yeah. And the belief was there. Yeah. I think that was a big part of Liverpool's success that season. They had the belief and they hit the ground running in the season and that belief just grew to the point where it was February, March, and having lost to Watford, they was shocked because they was on course for an invincible season, but they still wrapped up the title pretty early, albeit with COVID in between. Yeah. But you can see from the shot creating actions against and the XG against, which both went up in their title winning season, they didn't pay too much emphasis on conceding less. They paid more emphasis on creating more and attacking more. And what's fascinating though is Here's me trying to understand why Arsenal look as unexciting as last season. Is that the word, unexciting? Now look, Zinchenko didn't play a lot at the start of the season. Jesus hasn't been up top, and I honestly believe he's the glue to linking everything there. And Partey as a 6, as a generator of football, I still think he does it better than Rice, personally. And we haven't understood that left day. So there's a lot of reasons why maybe Arsenal haven't looked quite as fluid. I wonder, and this is me being hopeful, because I'm talking about a team that just won the Champions League, then won the Premier League, then went and won all the other trophies in the years after. But I'd also say that the 1920 team knocked out the Champions League by Atletico Madrid, didn't win the other domestic trophies, won the Premier League. Then followed up the season after with only kind of scraping into the top 4, having a really poor patch, before they then came again and competed for the quadruple, and then had another dip last season when they looked awful and fell out the Champions League. So is Arteta thinking, cool, momentum's one thing, heavy metal,
constant, bam, bam, bam football, great. But is that sustainable when you're trying to compete with a City side that have won 5 of the last 6, 7 of the last 9, whatever it might be? And I wonder whether that thinking comes into play.
I think probably does, but then again, I think the average age of our team now and the average age of Liverpool's team, then there'll be a big difference. Maybe not big, but there'll be a difference to say the least, because they had.
I would say so. They had an aging squad.
Yeah, they had seasoned, experienced players there. In keepers, Salah, Mane, Van Dijk, Henderson in the middle.
Yeah.
Who else did that season? Was it Fabinho in the middle?
Fabinho's in there. Wijnaldum for a little bit.
All experienced players. So even the inconsistencies after those 2 years of momentum building, you can put down to the age of the squad and also the fact that for 2 years there was gung-ho, rock and roll. Whereas with a young team, gung-ho, rock and roll, you got the legs in you. So yes, there's a risk that you shorten a player's career at the highest level if you run them into the ground. But in that time period, if you win major honours, that's what players look back on. A player doesn't necessarily look back on and say, well, I played 20 years. A player looks back on the trophies they collected and the clubs they played for. So, don't run them into the ground, but you use them listen, Arteta's using them how he knows. He knows them, training day in, day out. But also just free up that little bit of improvisation, impulsiveness when necessary, because that's in them. We saw it last season. And when you look at Odegaard, cultured footballer, street baller, Jesus, street baller, cultured baller, Martinelli, Saka, you can say street ballers as well.
Yeah, very true.
We've got ballers there that I know at times in a game would like to pass forward and seek the space rather than pass back and reset.
I agree. I completely agree. So let's try and answer the question then. Taking all this into account, taking everything we've pulled together in terms of comparing last season's numbers to this season's numbers, looking at what Liverpool did and how their data changed, going from second to first. And also worth remembering that this was a Liverpool team that finished second that would have won almost every other Premier League title race. Are Arsenal ready for the title? And is this a style of football that is having short-term success and that we can believe will have long-term success? What do you think?
I think we're ready.
Yeah?
I think we are ready.
I agree. I think we're ready.
We're as ready as we've ever been in the Emirates.
I completely agree. And I think while, the big thing is looking for me at our 8 this season compared to the same fixtures last season, that's the stat more than anything that makes me think, I know football's different. They sell players, they buy players, injuries, context, whatever. You can't directly compare. But I just think last season I never really believed you could lose at Goodison and never beat your title rivals and win a title. Something just never fit. Can you draw at home to Fulham? Can you draw at home in a North London derby? Yeah, I don't think that's season defining. To beat Everton away and beat Man City, clean sheets in both. And when I look at the personalities, Rice, Ødegaard, Jesus, Saka, Martinelli, personality, Saliba, Gabriel, I think, like this season, last season we always talked about it and there was a hesitation. I thought we're playing well enough, but will we maintain it? This year I'm more like, I don't know if we're playing at the level I think is going to be good enough for 38, but yet we seem to be topping last season, and I think we have levels to go, and I think we have a maturity that's going to carry us through, because I've seen it's going to carry us through big games, and I believe it will carry us through the 38. So I've said that we'll win the title, and I really believe we will.
Listen, there's just one thing that makes me hesitant. That's one of them is Havertz, but the one thing I'm talking about is the lack of a plan B yet.
Sure.
That might be addressed in January with Tony, we'll see, and we'll talk about it then. But I think even in some games this season, some games we've won, and some of the ones we've drawn, you can see that the game needed something different, not a like-for-like sub. And we just didn't have that in our locker. Yeah,
completely agree. Well, we discussed the Ivan Toney stuff on Forever Arsenal. Go check that out. That is out as well on podcast platforms. We had a really good debate about Ivan Toney, the other striking options. Go have a little look. And of course, we are now entering previews time. The Chelsea game is coming up this weekend. It's a massive game. Hope you enjoyed your 2-week break watching the highlights of the Man City game. Because, listen, you don't get to enjoy them for long before the next game comes and they say, you're only as good as your last win. So come on, Arsenal, let's get a big win on the weekend. Are Arsenal ready for the title? That is the question we're trying to answer here. It is earlier than we'd like to do in terms of behind the numbers because there's such limited data. However, I think with the narratives that's been going around about whether this Arsenal team actually improved on last year, I think just makes for a really interesting discussion. So I'd love to know your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thanks to Turkish for joining me. Really appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Turkish London Big Six. I've got my channel, James B, as well. And we will be keeping you up to date with everything ahead of the Chelsea match and on match day 2. See you then.